The children never noticed how the old elm leaned, almost as though it was trying to listen. They didn't pay attention to the knot in its trunk, swollen and misshapen like a heart under strain. To them, it was nothing more than another part of the playground. But when teachers thought no one was listening, they spoke in hushed tones, and the janitor claimed that at night he had seen things shift beneath the bark. On a crisp autumn morning, the school courtyard buzzed with its usual sounds, kids chasing one another, backpacks thudding against benches, and the shrill ringing of the bell giving them 5 more minutes before class began. But amid the noise came another sound, one that silenced everything else. A low growl from Ranger, the K-9 who never growled without cause. Officer Daniels had brought Ranger for a simple safety demonstration, meant to show the students how a trained police dog could obey commands and detect hidden objects. But halfway across the courtyard, Ranger froze. His ears pricked forward, his body went stiff, and his eyes locked on the elm. The growl deepened, carrying something ancient, something that had nothing to do with training. At first, the children laughed. "He sees a squirrel," a boy shouted, and the group giggled. But Daniels felt the tension in the leash like a wire pulled tight. Ranger was straining toward the tree, muscles coiled, hackles raised. Daniels frowned. He had worked with police dogs for 2 decades. He knew the difference between curiosity and warning. This was a warning. The elm had been standing for over 200 years, older than the school, older than most of the town. Its roots split the sidewalk. Its branches loomed wide like a sentinel on guard. Parents had told stories about it for generations, tales meant to frighten children, whispers of voices in the bark on windy nights, warnings never to linger there after dark. But stories alone wouldn't make a police dog react this way. Daniels ordered Ranger to heel, but the dog ignored him, pulling harder toward the trunk. The leash creaked under the strain. Then came a sharp bark that echoed against the school's red brick walls. The chatter of children died instantly, and teachers exchanged uneasy glances. Ranger barked again, pawing at the cracked pavement near the roots, and Daniels had to pull him back. The elm stood motionless, immense, its silence almost mocking. Yet Daniels couldn't shake the unease pressing in on him, the feeling that Ranger was sensing something no one else dared acknowledge. By lunchtime, the demonstration had been forgotten. The children went about their day, the bells rang, and life returned to its rhythm. But Daniels lingered with Ranger, who sat at the tree's base, staring, ears pinned back as though waiting for the trunk to breathe. Daniels studied the bark more closely. That bulge. He'd never really noticed how unnatural it looked. Too smooth, too round, as though the tree had swallowed something. A chill swept through him. He tugged Ranger away, but the dog whined, staring back at the knot with unblinking eyes. That night, Daniels couldn't rest. He sipped coffee at the kitchen table while Ranger paced the living room, restless. Every time Daniels closed his eyes, he saw the elm again, not as a tree, but as something containing, hiding, guarding. He remembered the old rumors, the 3 children who had vanished in the 1960s. The cases were never solved, the town dismissing them as runaways or family troubles. Daniels had read those files years ago, but had any of them mentioned the elm? He couldn't recall. The next morning, he returned to the school before anyone else arrived. Ranger leapt from the truck and made straight for the tree, nose to the ground, relentless. "All right, partner," Daniels murmured. "Show me." Ranger pawed at the roots again, whining, claws scraping dirt. Daniels crouched, flashlight in hand, and scanned the crevices. Something flickered, metal. He leaned closer, but the angle was difficult. Ranger barked sharply, insistent. Daniels brushed away wet leaves and soil until his fingers touched something cold and smooth. He froze. It wasn't the object itself that chilled him. It was the sound. A faint, almost human murmur from inside the trunk. It vanished as quickly as it came. Just the wind, he told himself. Just the wind. But Ranger didn't believe that. His body was rigid, ears alert, eyes locked on the bulge in the bark as if staring at something alive. Daniels reported the incident to the principal, but the man waved it off. Old trees make noises. Wind, squirrels, raccoons, you name it. Don't go scaring parents with ghost stories. But Daniels wasn't satisfied, and Ranger refused to forget. Each time they passed the school, the dog strained toward the elm, barking, whining, refusing to obey. One evening, the janitor pulled Daniels aside, his voice low. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" Daniels narrowed his eyes. "Seen what?" The man glanced toward the elm. "That bulge. It's not just wood. My father used to tell me about those missing kids. Said they were last seen playing here. Every time the police came around, the records just disappeared." "What are you saying?" Daniels asked. The janitor's gaze flicked nervously to the tree. "I'm saying some things are better left alone." He walked off, leaving Daniels in the fading light with Ranger growling low at the elm once more. That night, Daniels returned to his office and pulled out the cold case files. Dusty folders, yellowed pages, photos of the 3 children, smiling faces frozen in time. He read page after page until his stomach clenched. At the very end, scrawled in red pen, was a note he had never seen before. "Check the tree." Daniels sat back hard in his chair, the words burning into his mind. Across the room, Ranger lifted his head, ears standing tall. The dog's eyes fixed on Daniels, steady and unblinking, as if he understood the truth was right there, sealed inside the bark of a tree older than the town itself. For the first time in his career, Daniels wondered if his canine partner wasn't leading him toward a criminal or contraband, but toward something far darker, something that had been waiting centuries to be found. The next morning, a thin mist settled over the elementary school courtyard, hugging the ground like a ghost reluctant to move on. From the moment Daniels opened the back of the squad SUV, Ranger was restless. The German Shepherd sprang out, tail rigid, nose slicing through the cold air. His movements were sharp, deliberate, every muscle alert. Daniels felt it too, that weight in the atmosphere. Maybe it was the sleepless night. Maybe it was the notes scrawled in red ink at the bottom of an old case file. "Check the tree." The words circled his mind like vultures. He hadn't told a soul. Not yet. Ranger didn't wait for a command. He lunged forward as if pulled by an invisible chain, dragging Daniels across the damp concrete. The fog closed in, shrinking the world to just the tree ahead. The elm loomed out of the mist, crooked branches stretching wide like arms over the empty swings. Ranger barked once, sharp and furious. Daniels braced the leash. "All right, partner, show me." The dog tore at the same patch of ground they had uncovered the day before, claws raking through damp soil. Daniels knelt, pushing aside the churned mud until that faint glimmer appeared again. A dull shimmer of metal lodged deep in the bark. He flicked on his flashlight, the beam catching the curve of something smooth, old, and unyielding. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't playground scrap. The elm had grown around it. A sound drifted on the wind, faint, broken. Daniels froze. Ranger's ears snapped forward. For a heartbeat, Daniels swore he heard it clearly, a muffled cry. A child's voice, small and desperate, rising from inside the tree. His hand jerked back, flashlight beam wobbling. The bark was silent again. "Wind," Daniels muttered, but his voice cracked. "Just the wind." Ranger's low growl disagreed. Later that day, Daniels sat in the principal's office with a cup of bitter coffee cooling between his palms. Principal Howard, a stocky man with thinning hair and nervous hands that kept tugging at his tie, leaned back in his chair with a weary sigh. "Officer, I appreciate your concern," Howard said. "Truly. But we can't alarm parents with ghost stories about an old tree. We already have enough anxiety with lockdown drills. You understand." Daniels nodded, though his instincts screamed otherwise. Years of crime scenes and missing person cases told him when pieces didn't fit. And here, every clue pointed back to the elm. At his side, Ranger sat rigid, eyes locked on the window where the tree's high branches swayed against the pale sky. Howard's voice softened. "Off the record, you're not the first to mention it. In the 70s, a groundskeeper swore he dug up bones near the roots. Sheriff at the time dismissed it, claimed it was just animal remains. That was the end of it. People stopped asking questions." Daniels narrowed his eyes. "But you don't believe that?" The principal hesitated, then gave the smallest shake of his head. "Number, I don't." That night, Daniels drove to the county archives. The building hummed with buzzing fluorescent lights, the clerk barely glancing up as Daniels signed the log. Dust clung to his fingers as he sifted through boxes of files, old missing children posters, yellowed police reports, photographs that felt far too heavy in his hands. 3 children gone in the 1960s, 2 more in the 70s. Then another in 1989, Sarah Whitmore, 9 years old, smiling wide with a gap between her teeth, last seen leaving the school carnival. Daniels flipped the page. Again, the same handwriting in red ink circled on the final report. "Check the tree." His pulse hammered. He slammed the folder shut, tucked it under his arm, and left before the clerk could say a word. Back home, he spread the files across his kitchen table. Ranger paced, whining, tail twitching with unease. Daniels rubbed at his temples, staring at the patterns laid bare before him. The disappearances stretched across decades, always near the school, always orbiting the elm. But the strangest thing wasn't the cases themselves. It was what the files didn't say. Pages blacked out, sections cut away, as though someone had erased the truth on purpose. Ranger stopped pacing, his ears pricked forward, body going rigid. A growl built deep in his chest. Daniels followed the dog's gaze to the window. In the glow of the streetlight, the elm's silhouette loomed in the distance. For the briefest second, Daniels thought he saw the bulge in the trunk shift, like something beneath the bark had moved. The following morning, Daniels was back at the school before the first bus pulled in. The air was brittle and sharp, the courtyard unnervingly still. He unclipped Ranger's leash, and the dog charged straight for the elm. This time, Daniels came prepared, spade, pry bar, gloves. He crouched beside the roots where Ranger clawed furiously, earth flying under his paws. Together, they scraped away the soil until the dull gleam of metal came into view. Daniels wedged the pry bar against the edge and heaved. Bark splintered, wood cracked, and little by little a hollow emerged, dark, deep, unsettling. Ranger barked sharply, digging harder, dirt scattering around them. Daniels lowered his flashlight into the cavity. and his breath hitched. There, pressed against the very core of the elm, rested a cylinder, bronze, tarnished with age, its surface etched with faint, almost forgotten symbols. The tree groaned around them, bark creaking like brittle bones. Ranger growled low, lips curled, teeth bared. Daniels reached inside, gloved fingers brushing the cold metal. The instant he touched it, the air shifted. The bark pulsed, then closed in on itself. The hollow sealed over seamlessly, smoother than before, as though it had never existed. The cylinder was gone. Daniels staggered back, chest tightening. Ranger barked and pawed furiously at the smooth bark, whining when nothing gave. The elm stood silent once more. That night, shaken and restless, Daniels called someone he trusted, Detective Morales, a veteran officer with 2 decades in missing persons. She picked up on the second ring. "You sound rattled," she said. "I need you to check something," Daniels whispered, glancing at Ranger pacing. "Old files. Something isn't right. Something's missing." There was a pause, then Morales exhaled slowly. "You mean the kids, don't you?" A chill ran down Daniels' spine. "Daniels, I grew up here. Everyone knows, but no one talks about it." Silence pressed between them before she added, her voice low, "Be careful. In this town, some things are meant to stay buried." The next morning, Daniel stood in the schoolyard. Children chased each other across the courtyard. Parents gathered on the sidewalks, chatting. Teachers sipped coffee from travel mugs. Life went on, ordinary and bright. Yet Ranger sat stiff at the base of the elm, his eyes locked on the slight bulge in the bark. Every so often, he whimpered, ears twitching as though catching whispers no one else could hear. Daniels crouched beside him, hand resting on the dog's back. "I don't know what's in there, boy," he murmured, "but we're going to find out." Ranger's tail thudded once against the dirt, his body pressed close, loyal and tense. The tree swayed in the breeze, its leaves whispering secrets that seemed meant only for the dog. And faintly, just for a moment, Daniels thought he heard it too. Laughter. Not lighthearted, but trapped. The days blurred into restless nights and uneasy mornings. Daniels couldn't shake the image of the elm sealing itself, swallowing the bronze cylinder whole. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw those strange symbols etched into the metal, flickering in his mind like half-remembered dreams. Ranger fared worse. He no longer slept soundly. Nights were spent pacing, whining, his ears twitching at sounds invisible to Daniels. Sometimes he planted himself by the front window, eyes locked on the shadow of the schoolyard elm, growling into the dark. One morning, Daniels poured himself another bitter cup of coffee and stared at the case files scattered across his table. Black and white photos of missing children stared back. Sarah Whitmore, 9. Timothy Green, 11. Marie Jensen, Oda. Their innocent smiles frozen in time. Beneath each report, red ink scrawled the same haunting words, "Check the tree." By Thursday, Daniels returned to the school under the guise of routine patrol. Children spilled into the courtyard, laughter ringing through the air, parents honking from the pickup line, teachers calling out instructions. A perfectly normal afternoon. But Ranger didn't see ordinary. The moment his paws touched the ground, his head snapped toward the elm. He pulled at the leash with such force Daniels had to brace himself. "Easy," Daniels muttered, though his own heart pounded. Then it came, the sound. Not laughter, not faint cries imagined in the night. This was sharper, closer. A hollow knock from within the tree, slow, deliberate, like someone trapped inside, begging to be freed. Daniels froze. Ranger erupted, barking, lunging at the elm. Then, silence. Across the courtyard, a little girl clutching her backpack had also stopped, her wide eyes locked on the tree before she bolted to her mother's car, speaking words Daniels couldn't hear. That evening, Daniels sat in a worn booth across from Morales in a dimly lit diner. The neon sign buzzed above, bathing the chipped tables in sickly blue. Morales stirred her coffee, eyes narrowing. "You're pale, Daniels. What did you see?" He told her everything. The cylinder, the bark closing, the knocking. Morales' expression didn't shift until he finished. Then she leaned forward, voice dropping low. "My uncle worked the Whitmore case back in '89. He always said something was wrong. The sheriff pulled him off the moment he started asking about that tree." "Why?" Daniels pressed. "Nobody ever found out. He said the order came from higher up. State level. After that, the case went cold. Files vanished. Witnesses withdrew. It was like everything got buried in the tree," Daniels muttered. Morales' lips tightened. "Be careful. If that's true, then someone, or something, made sure it stayed hidden. And Ranger's not the only one who'll notice when you get too close." The next morning, Daniels and Ranger were called to the school for a separate issue: vandalism by the playground. Spray paint, beer cans, nothing unusual. As Daniels took notes, Ranger broke free, circling back toward the elm. Nose pressed to the roots, tail rigid. Daniels followed, muttering apologies to the teacher. Ranger clawed at the dirt until his paws struck something solid. Daniels knelt, brushing away soil until his fingers found it, a small object, smooth and worn. He lifted it carefully into the light. A shoe buckle, rusted, bent, old, unmistakable. Daniel's stomach clenched as he pulled a photo from his pocket, the picture of Sarah Whitmore. In it, the little girl wore polished black shoes with square buckles. He stared at the rusted buckle in his hand. It was real, solid, undeniable. Not just stories anymore. Ranger whined softly, and Daniel's breathing turned ragged. That evening, Daniels parked his truck near the school and stayed long. After darkness fell, Ranger sat stiff in the passenger seat, ears pricked forward, eyes locked on the elm. Streetlights buzzed overhead, throwing long, restless shadows across the courtyard. At night, the tree looked different, larger, more menacing. Its branches clawed at the sky, and the bulge in its trunk seemed grotesque, swollen in the dim light. Daniels cracked his window. A cold, damp breeze carried the faint stench of decay. Then it came again. Knocking. 3 slow, hollow raps. Silence. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, and then he heard it. A whisper. Not the wind. Not his imagination. A child's voice. "Help." Ranger erupted, barking and throwing himself against the glass. Daniels slammed the truck into gear and sped away, his pulse thundering so hard he could barely keep the road straight. By the weekend, Daniels was unraveling. Every room in his house felt suffocating, haunted. Ranger refused to eat or sleep. He kept his post at the window day and night, staring toward the elm like a sentry on guard. Daniels called Morales. "We need to open that tree. Dig it out. Whatever's inside is tied to the missing kids. I know it." Her reply was sharp. "And if you're right, what if opening it lets out something we can't put back?" Daniels had no answer. That night, his dreams twisted into nightmares of the elm. He saw the cylinder wedged deep inside its core, throbbing faintly as though alive. Children's faces pressed against the bark, mouths open in silent cries. He woke drenched in sweat, Ranger whining beside the bed. Monday morning, the school principal summoned Daniels to his office. Howard's face was pale. weary. I don't know what you're digging into, officer, but it needs to stop. Parents are asking questions. If you stir up the past, it'll come down on both of us. Daniels leaned forward. What's in that tree? Howard's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the elm. His voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes at night, I swear I still hear them. Daniel's chest tightened. Hear who? Howard didn't answer. He just shut the blinds. That evening, Daniels returned with Ranger one final time. The courtyard was empty, washed in the orange haze of street lamps. The elm loomed taller than ever, its bulge casting a warped shadow across the ground. Daniels set down his bag of tools, his hands trembling. Ranger stood beside him, low growl rumbling. Okay, boy, Daniels whispered. We finish this tonight. He drove the pry bar into the bark. Sweat trickled down his face despite the cold. Wood splintered. The tree groaned, a deep, guttural sound like a living thing in pain. Ranger barked furiously, tearing at the dirt. A cavity split open, revealing a sliver of darkness within. But then the earth quaked. The roots shifted, coiling like snakes, knocking Daniels backward. He hit the pavement, breath ripped from his lungs. Ranger lunged at the twisting roots, teeth flashing, his snarls echoing through the courtyard. From inside the hollow, a faint, sickly glow flickered like candlelight trapped behind glass. Then came the voices, dozens of them, children, whispering, layered, overlapping. Words too faint to understand. The cavity began to close, bark knitting together like skin healing over a wound. Ranger howled, a desperate, mournful cry. Daniel scrambled to his knees, reaching for the gap. Wait, he shouted. Wait! But the light dimmed, the voices faded. The hollow sealed, smoother than before, sap glistening like fresh blood. Daniel slumped back against the pavement, chest heaving, hands trembling. Ranger pressed against him, eyes wide, whining in fear. The courtyard was silent, too silent. The bulge on the elm's trunk seemed larger now, grotesque under the streetlights. Daniels felt dread sink into him. Whatever was inside that tree hadn't been defeated. It had been awakened. By Tuesday morning, whispers were already spreading. Parents lingered at drop-off. Voices hushed, eyes darting toward the elm as though it were cursed. Some pulled their children away from the courtyard entirely, ushering them through side doors and back entrances. Daniel stood with arms crossed, pretending to monitor traffic, though his eyes never left the tree. The bulge was bigger. Cracked bark oozed sap that shimmered like amber tears in the morning sun. Ranger sat at his side, rigid, hackles raised, growl rumbling every time the wind stirred the branches. Principal Howard approached, tugging at his tie with shaky fingers. You see what's happening, don't you? People are talking again. You can't let this turn into panic. Daniels kept his gaze fixed on the elm. Maybe panic is the right reaction. Howard's face went pale. He shook his head, voice dropping. Number, if we acknowledge it, if we admit something's wrong, then it wins. Daniels turned to him, eyes narrowing. What wins? Howard didn't answer. He walked away. That night, Daniels sat on his porch. Ranger sprawled across his boots, restless. The neighborhood was too quiet. Every sound sharpened, every creak of the night amplified. Daniels lit a cigarette, though he hadn't smoked in years. Smoke curled upward into the cool dark. Ranger's head snapped up, ears stiff, body rigid, a growl building deep in his chest. Daniels followed his gaze toward the distant outline of the schoolyard elm. For just a moment, he saw it too. a faint glow flickering inside the bulge, like a lantern behind the bark. He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his heel. "Hell no," he muttered. By midweek, whispers had grown into full-blown rumors. Parents claimed their children woke up in the middle of the night, screaming about shadows in their bedrooms. Shadows shaped like branches reaching across the walls. Teachers said they heard faint tapping behind the walls of their classrooms, steady and deliberate, like knuckles rapping against wood. A custodian insisted he heard laughter drifting through the empty hallways long after the building had closed. At the diner, Daniels met Morales again, both of them worn thin by sleepless nights. "It's getting worse," Daniels admitted, rubbing his temples. "Whatever's in that tree isn't staying there anymore." Morales leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And you think it's connected to the disappearances?" Daniels pulled a rusted shoe buckle from his pocket and set it on the table. Morales stared, her jaw tightening. "That's evidence," she whispered. "Real evidence." Daniels gave a weary nod. "If I take it to the department, they'll cover it up, just like before." "So what do you want to do?" she asked. Daniels glanced out the diner window at Ranger sitting in the squad car, nose pressed against the glass, eyes locked on the schoolyard. "Even from here," Daniels said quietly, "I want this to end, whatever it takes." That evening, he drove past the school after dark. The lot was deserted. The swings on the playground swayed gently in the wind. The massive elm stood silent, its branches curling upward like claws. In the passenger seat, Ranger whined and pawed at the dashboard, desperate to get closer. Daniels cut the engine and sat for a moment, the weight of the air pressing down on his chest the same way it had the night the cylinder first appeared. Flashlight in hand, he stepped out, Ranger leaping beside him. Their footsteps crunched over gravel as they crossed the yard. The tree loomed larger with every step, its swollen trunk grotesque in the glow of the streetlight. Daniels raised the flashlight, the beam catching fresh, jagged scratches high in the bark, too high for any animal to reach. Ranger growled, clawing at the tree's base. Daniels pressed his palm against the trunk. It was unnaturally cold. Then came the sound, a whisper, faint and brittle, seeping through the wood. "Help us." Daniels staggered back. Ranger barked furiously, tearing at the soil as the ground began to tremble. By morning, unease had gripped the town. Word spread that 2 students hadn't shown up for class. Their parents swore the kids had left home, but only their backpacks turned up near the bike racks. Daniels arrived to chaos, parents shouting, teachers weeping, reporters crowding the gates. Ranger pulled hard on the leash, nose to the ground, dragging him toward the elm again. At the roots, the dog scratched frantically, barking with urgent desperation. Daniels crouched with his flashlight. At first, when the dirt shifted to reveal something pale, his stomach turned. It looked like bone. But brushing the soil aside revealed twisted, curling roots. Still, Ranger kept digging until his claws struck something solid. Daniels reached down and pulled out a small bracelet. Plastic beads strung together, faded, but still legible. The name spelled out was Emily. His chest tightened. Emily was one of the missing children. That night, Daniels couldn't bring himself to go home. He sat in his truck outside the school with the headlights off. Ranger curled beside him, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The elm towered ahead, branches shifting even though the air was still. Daniels gripped the bracelet in one hand, the rusted buckle in the other. Proof, yes. But of what? Exhausted, he leaned back against the seat. Then the knocking started again. Louder this time, 3 sharp thuds from inside the trunk. Ranger shot up, snarling. Daniels fumbled for his flashlight and stepped into the damp night air, heart racing. The knocking quickened, urgent and unrelenting. He pressed his ear to the bark. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice, clear and chilling. "Don't let them out." Daniels jerked back, nearly dropping the light. The tree groaned, its bark splitting, sap oozing like blood. A pale glow pulsed from within before the trunk sealed itself again. Just like that, the courtyard fell silent. Daniels trembled. Ranger pressed against his leg, growling low. The bracelet in his pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The words echoed in his mind. "Don't let them out." Were the missing children inside the tree, their voices calling for help? Or was something darker masquerading as them? He looked down at Ranger, whose steady eyes seemed to plead with him, urging him forward. And in that instant, Daniels understood something terrifying. The tree wasn't just hiding something, it was listening. By Thursday, the story had spread far beyond the schoolyard. Reporters called the precinct, and the school board announced an emergency meeting. Everywhere Daniels went, grocery store, gas station, even the diner, people stared like he was cursed. He sat in his patrol SUV outside the school, hands locked around the wheel. Ranger shifted in the back, restless, eyes fixed on the elm even from a distance. Finally, Daniels opened the door. "All right, partner," he murmured. "Let's see what today brings." The courtyard was already filling with parents. Some demanded answers. Others clung to their children, refusing to let them near the tree. Principal Howard approached, face pale and lined with exhaustion. "You've stirred up a storm," he said. "The board wants you off this, immediately." Daniels crossed his arms. "I can't. Not with kids missing. Not with..." He trailed off and pulled the bracelet from his pocket. The plastic beads caught the faint morning light, their letters glimmering. Emily Howard swallowed hard, his eyes flicking toward the tree before quickly turning away. "Don't show that around here," he muttered. That evening, Daniels walked into the school board meeting. The room was crowded. Board members in stiff suits, teachers with crossed arms, parents murmuring in the back. Ranger lay at his feet, head raised, unblinking eyes following everyone in the room. The board chairwoman, a severe figure with sharp glasses, struck the gavel. "This meeting is now in session. We are here to address Officer Daniels and his troubling claims." Daniels stood, the bracelet in one hand, the rusted shoe buckle in the other. "These aren't claims," he said firmly. "They're evidence. I found them in the roots of that elm, and they match missing children's cases that were quietly buried decades ago." Whispers rippled across the audience. The chairwoman leaned forward, voice tight. "Officer, you're walking a dangerous line. These rumors have lingered for years, but they are not facts." "Then why," Daniel shot back, "do the old files have red ink notes telling investigators to look at the tree? Why do those files keep disappearing from the archives?" The tension in the room was suffocating. A gray-haired board member with trembling hands finally spoke. "Enough. You'll frighten the children. You'll destroy this school's reputation. Some things are better left alone." Daniels glared at him, fury burning in his chest. "Better left alone? Tell that to the parents whose children never came back?" At his side, Ranger gave a low growl, echoing his anger. When Daniels left the meeting, the night air felt thick, heavy, pressing down on him like a weighted blanket. Ranger trotted at his side, ears twitching, nose raised to the wind. As they crossed the courtyard, Ranger froze, body rigid, eyes locked on the elm. Daniels followed his gaze. For an instant, the bulge in the trunk glowed faintly, a pale, sickly light, like a dying lantern flickering behind the bark. Ranger barked, lunging at the tree with bared teeth. Daniels tightened his grip on the leash, pulse racing. But the glow vanished, leaving only cracked, dark bark behind. That night, Daniels parked his SUV just beyond the school gates. He couldn't bring himself to drive home. Ranger paced in the back seat, whining, pawing at the glass. Hours dragged. Midnight. 1, then 2. Each time Daniels began to drift, Ranger's sudden bark jolted him awake. At 3 in the morning, Daniels saw it. Movement. Not in the branches, but in the roots. They shifted, curling against the soil like writhing snakes. He gripped the steering wheel hard, blinking, but when he looked again, they were still. Silent. He rubbed his eyes. "I'm losing it," he muttered. But Ranger wasn't fooled. The dog pressed his nose against the glass, fogging it with hot breath, growling deep in his chest. By Friday morning, panic had consumed the town. Another student failed to arrive for class. Parents screamed at administrators, threatening lawsuits. News vans clustered at the gates, cameras aimed at the elm. Daniels stood at the edge of the crowd, Ranger tense beside him, body taut like a wire. Reporters shouted questions. Is it true children are vanishing? Did police find something hidden in the tree? Daniels ignored them, watching Ranger instead. The dog strained at the leash, pulling him toward the roots, barking sharply. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Daniels dropped to his knees and began clawing at the dirt with his bare hands. The soil was damp, foul with rot. Then his fingers struck something hard, buried deep. Cameras flashed as he pulled it free. It was a small wooden object, crudely carved, the size of a toy block. But the markings etched into it weren't playful. They were symbols, jagged and unnatural, gouged deep into the wood. The crowd fell silent. Ranger barked furiously, lunging toward the trunk, eyes wild. Daniels shoved the block into his pocket, yanked the leash back, and pushed through the onlookers without a word. That night, under the harsh glare of his kitchen lamp, Daniels studied the block. The carvings twisted across the surface in spirals, sharp angles, intersecting lines, eerily similar to the faint engravings he'd seen on the bronze cylinder before the tree swallowed it. Ranger whined softly at his side. Daniels whispered, "It's all connected, isn't it, boy?" The dog rested his head on Daniel's knee, eyes filled with something that looked painfully close to human emotion. Fear, loyalty, warning. Daniels clenched the block tight, the memory of the whisper crawling back. "Don't let them out." But the question gnawed at him. Who were they? The missing children? Or something else? Something far darker pretending to be them? On Saturday morning, frantic pounding rattled his front door. Morales stood there, pale, her voice shaking. "They've suspended you," she said. "Pulled you off the case. Too much pressure from the board, from the town. They want this buried." Daniels gave a bitter laugh, running a hand through his unshaven hair. "Of course they do." Morales leaned closer, her eyes fierce. "Listen to me. Don't stop. I've seen your evidence. I know you're right, but be careful. People are watching you now." Daniels glanced at Ranger, who growled softly, ears pinned, gaze fixed on the window. Watching. Always watching. That night, Daniels couldn't resist. He and Ranger slipped back into the courtyard. The school lay in darkness, the playground deserted. The elm loomed, its bulge grotesque, its branches swaying though the air was still. Daniels pulled the wooden block from his pocket and pressed it to the bark. Under the moonlight, the carvings glowed faintly. Ranger barked furiously, snapping at the air as though something unseen closed in around them. The tree groaned, a guttural sound vibrating through the ground. The bulge pulsed, sap dripping like blood. Then the whisper returned. "Don't let them out." Daniels froze, the block trembling in his hand. Ranger lunged, snarling at the tree. The bulge split open just slightly, a crack forming wide, enough to reveal a glimpse inside. Daniel's breath caught. He saw movement, not wood, not metal. Fingers, thin, pale fingers pushed through the gap. Daniels staggered backward, his chest slamming hard as he fell. Ranger let out a furious howl, straining at his leash, desperate to lunge. Then, as quickly as it had opened, the bark sealed over, smooth and unbroken. Daniels dropped to his knees, gasping for air. His hand trembled so violently that the wooden block nearly slipped from his grip. The courtyard fell still again. The elm stood silent, tall, and cold as ever. But Daniels knew that whatever was buried within it wasn't going to remain hidden for much longer. By Sunday morning, Daniels looked worn down, fraying at the edges. His beard had grown thick, his eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep, and his uniform was wrinkled from endless hours behind the wheel of his SUV. Ranger mirrored his unease, pacing restlessly, his dark coat bristling at every sound. On the passenger seat, the carved block rested between them, faintly glowing in the dim gray light. Daniel swore he could feel warmth radiating from it, though the surface was icy cold to the touch. The whisper still haunted him, "Don't let them out." But whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the pale fingers pushing through the elm's cracked bark, small hands reaching. Children. His fist slammed against the steering wheel. "Damn it!" Ranger barked sharply, jolting him back to himself. That afternoon, Daniels drove to the school again. A few reporters still lingered, but far fewer than before. Parents were keeping their children home now. The once lively playground was silent. The elm stood alone in the courtyard, grotesque and swollen, its branches drooping like heavy, lifeless arms. Ranger leapt from the SUV, nose to the ground, tugging Daniel straight toward the roots. The dog barked, ears pinned flat, muscles tense. Kneeling beside him, Daniels brushed dirt away until his hand struck something solid. Another object, hidden deep in the soil. He pulled it free, a weathered notebook with a cracked leather cover. The pages inside were brittle, edges curling with age, but the cramped handwriting was still legible. His pulse quickened as he flipped through the drawings. Strange sketches of the elm split open, a metal cylinder lodged within its trunk. Marginal notes read, "Containment, sealed, guarded by nature." At the bottom of one page, scrawled hastily in uneven script, "The children are the key." Daniel's chest tightened. "What the hell does that mean?" Ranger growled, pressing his nose against the pages, as if sensing the words carried something more than ink. That night, Daniels brought the notebook to Morales. They sat in her garage with the door shut, a single lamp casting long shadows across stacks of old case files. She turned through the fragile pages, her brow furrowed. This handwriting, early 1900s, maybe even older. Whoever wrote this knew. The tree was dangerous. They weren't just hiding something inside it. They were using it. Daniels leaned forward. Using it for what? Morales's voice dropped low. Containment, maybe sacrifice. The word lingered like poison in the air. Daniels clenched his fist. Children. They were using children. Ranger growled in the corner, his eyes fixed on the notebook as if it carried the same malignant presence as the tree itself. By Monday, Daniels was suspended. His badge was confiscated. His access revoked. None of it mattered. This wasn't about procedure anymore. This was about the children, past and present. That night, he returned to the school. Headlights off. Ranger silent in the back seat. The courtyard was empty, the building looming like a dark sentinel. With the notebook and block in hand, Daniels approached the elm. He pressed the carved wood against the bark. This time, the symbols blazed brighter, casting a ghostly light across his fingers. The tree shuddered. Ranger barked wildly, snapping at the air as if fighting an unseen enemy. The swollen trunk split open. A dim light seeped out, carrying with it a sound that froze Daniel's blood. Children crying. Dozens of voices overlapped, pleading. Daniel stumbled back. "My God!" But beneath the sobs came another voice, deeper, ancient, not human. "Release us." The glow intensified, pulsing like a heartbeat. Ranger howled, teeth bared, straining against his leash. Daniels dragged him back, heart pounding, as the bark sealed shut once more with a wet, sucking sound. The voices faded. Silence returned. Daniels collapsed onto the cold pavement, sweat running down his back. Ranger whined softly, pressing close. The block still glowed faintly in Daniel's palm. He whispered the words from the notebook. "The children are the key." His voice broke. "Key to what?" Ranger licked his hand, but his gaze never left the elm, as if warning him that the answer wasn't one he wanted to know. The next morning, Morales appeared at Daniel's door. She looked as sleepless as he felt, her hands shaking as she set a folder on the table. "I went deeper," she said. "Found something the board couldn't bury. Newspaper archives from the 1800s. That tree was planted in 1825, but it wasn't just planted. It was chosen." She unfolded a yellowed clipping. The headline read, "Town Dedication, the Elm of Guardianship." The article described how a group of founders, professors, and ministers had entrusted their vessel to the tree, a vessel that had to be sustained. Daniel's stomach turned. "Sustained? You mean fed?" Morales's haunted eyes met his. "Children." At the word, Ranger growled, teeth flashing. That night, Daniels and Morales returned together. The courtyard was dark, leaves skittering across the pavement in the wind. The elm loomed above them, vast and menacing. Daniels clutched the notebook. Morales held a flashlight, her hand trembling. Ranger strained at his leash, ready, driven. They approached the swollen trunk. Daniels pressed the block against the bark once more. The carvings burned brighter than ever. The elm groaned, splitting wide. Inside, the cylinder glowed with a faint, sickly light. Etchings shimmered across its surface, and there, pressed against the shining metal, were faces. Children's faces, pale and hollow. Eyes wide with despair. Their mouths gaped in silent screams, their small hands clawing desperately at the bark. Morales gasped, covering her mouth. Daniel's throat tightened. Dear God, they're not gone. They're trapped. The children's eyes shifted toward him, then to Ranger. The voices rose together, overlapping, urgent, pleading, "Let us out, let us out, let us out." Daniel stumbled back, shaking his head. Number. Then, cutting through the chaos, came the deeper voice. Ancient, cold. "You cannot hold us forever." The bark slammed shut with a violent snap, swallowing the glow, the faces, the voices. Silence fell heavy over the courtyard. Daniel stood trembling, his breath clouding in the frigid night air. Morales looked shattered, her flashlight quivering in her hand. Ranger pressed against Daniel's leg, growling low, his eyes locked on the elm. The wooden block in Daniel's palm had gone dark again. At his feet, the notebook lay open, its brittle pages fluttering in the wind. One line glared up at him in frenzied handwriting. "The children are not what they seem." Daniel's stomach dropped. He lifted his eyes to Morales, his voice raw and hoarse. "If they're not children, then what the hell are we letting out?" Ranger's growl deepened, steady and unrelenting, his gaze never leaving the tree. Around them, the elms swayed with the wind, ancient, silent, alive, and Daniels felt a bone-deep certainty. The real battle hadn't even begun. By Monday, the entire town seemed to be holding its breath. Parents kept their children home. Reporters had been pushed back behind police barricades. Teachers moved through the hallways in hushed steps, their eyes drifting toward the courtyard as if waiting for it to erupt. The elm didn't need attention. It commanded it. From his SUV, Daniels stared at the tree. It looked larger, its swollen trunk bulging more each day. The bark stretched taut, like skin straining to contain something beneath it. He could almost hear the groan of wood under pressure, something inside pushing, desperate to get free. Ranger sat rigid in the back seat, his ears pinned forward, body tense. Since dawn, he hadn't taken his eyes off the trees. Whenever Daniels glanced in the mirror, those sharp amber eyes burned with unwavering intensity. Exhaustion pulled at Daniel's bones. His mind churned with images of pale fingers behind bark, the cryptic carvings, the notebook's warnings. But one phrase carved into those brittle pages refused to let go. The children are not what they seem. If they weren't children, what were they? That evening, he met Morales again. She looked as drained as he felt, her hands trembling as she spread a stack of copied clippings across his table. "Every 30 years, she whispered, tapping one of the yellowed pages. "Look at the pattern. Children vanish. No explanation. Always near the school. 30 years apart. Almost to the day." Daniels leaned over the papers, his jaw tight. The 60s, 1989. And now. His voice dropped to a mutter. "Cycles. It's feeding." Morales swallowed hard, lowering her voice. "And we're in the middle of the next one." At the word, Ranger growled, hackles rising, as if he understood. That night, Daniel couldn't stay away. The moon cast pale silver light across the empty courtyard. The elm loomed grotesque, its branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. Ranger leapt from the SUV, his growl deep, primal. Daniels followed, clutching the notebook in one hand and the carved block in the other. The bulge in the trunk pulsed faintly, glowing with sickly light. Daniels pressed the block against the bark. Instantly, the carvings flared, casting eerie shadows across the pavement. The tree groaned, splitting wider than ever before. The cylinder gleamed inside, its engravings shimmering like molten metal. Faces pressed against it, children's faces, pale and hollow, eyes wide, mouths stretched open in soundless screams. Ranger barked furiously, lunging at the trunk. Daniels yanked him back, his own heart pounding in his ears. The voices erupted, loud and desperate. "Help us! Let us out! Please!" Daniel's throat clenched. "I can't. I don't know what you are." Then it came, the other voice, deeper, commanding, ancient. "Open it, Daniel." His blood turned to ice. It knew his name. The bark split wider. Pale skeletal fingers forced their way out, writhing in the moonlight like worms. The cries rose higher, deafening. Ranger lunged again, snarling, his bark slicing through the voices like a blade. The cylinder pulsed harder, light flickering across its etched surface. The carvings on the block in Daniel's hand burned bright, scalding hot. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head as the whispers invaded his mind, visions flooding him. Children playing in the courtyard decades ago, laughter twisting into screams, faces swallowed by bark, parents sobbing at empty doorsteps, and then darker images, shadows writhing inside the cylinder, shapes that were not human, eyes glowing from within, staring back at him. Daniel gasped, choking on air. Ranger pressed against him, rigid as a shield, growling ferociously. The tree groaned again. The crack widened. Summoning every ounce of strength, Daniel shoved the block against the bark. "No," he roared. "You're not coming out." The glow faltered. The faces contorted, their mouths twisting in fury. The voices shifted, no longer pleading but filled with rage. "You cannot hold us forever. The door will open. The cycle will continue." With a final guttural roar, the bark slammed shut. Silence swallowed the courtyard. Daniel collapsed onto the ground, chest heaving. Ranger panted beside him, eyes locked unblinking on the elm. By morning, the streets of town lay quiet. Too quiet. Parents kept their children inside. The playground stood deserted. At the diner, conversations dropped to whispers as he passed, fragments reaching his ears. Mad tree, missing children. No one dared meet his gaze. Back at his table, Daniel sat before the notebook, the wooden block, and the corroded shoe buckle. Symbols, signs, fragments of evidence, warnings maybe, but none of it formed an answer he could accept. On the rug, Ranger rested, yet even in stillness the dog remained alert. His ears twitched, his body tense, as though the fight was far from finished. "You're the only one who knows, boy," Daniel murmured, "the only one who sees it for what it is." Ranger opened his eyes, calm but steady, and for a fleeting moment, Daniel was certain the dog understood. That night, he returned to the school once more. In the courtyard beneath the glow of the lamps, he stood with Ranger at his side, staring at the elm. The bulge in its trunk was quiet, no light, no whispers, nothing but silence. Yet Daniel knew better. The cycle hadn't ended. The missing children weren't coming back. Whatever had been fed through generations was still there, waiting for the next knock. He placed a hand against the bark. It was cold, smooth, still, but deep inside he felt it. A faint rhythm, like a heartbeat. Ranger pressed against his leg, growling low, teeth bared, eyes locked on the swelling in the tree. "We'll be ready, boy," Daniel whispered. "Whatever it is, whatever it wants, we'll be ready." But deep down, he knew the truth. The tree wasn't finished, not even close. The story closes with Daniel and Ranger standing beneath the elm's shadow, the man uncertain, the dog unwavering. The courtyard lay silent, heavy with secrets too ancient, too dark to fade away. And in the stillness lingered the question, sharp as smoke in the air. Were those voices the cries of children calling for help?